Will Sam Draper be at Essendon in 2026? What happens if he stays? And what happens if he goes? Let's discuss. G'day faithful, hope the bye week is treating you well. One of the biggest talking points for the rest of the season is going to be whether or not Sam Draper chooses to stay at Essendon. There's obviously interest from Adelaide and Brisbane. Essendon has reportedly tabled a 4-year offer to him, but there's still discussions underway. Is he going to stay? Is he going to go? Let's explore the ramifications on both scenarios, the pros, the cons, what could happen if he does choose to stay, and of course, if he chooses to go. Let's get into it. Let's start with stay. So, Sam Draper chooses to stay at Essendon. What are the pros of this happening? Let's list them. Sam Draper is the best ruckman at Essendon. He is the number one ruck on our list as it stands right now. There are other guys who've obviously promising for the future. There's Old Gold who's at the end of his career. Right now, Sam Draper is in his prime and he is the number one. He has the most ability to impact the game. He's developed his forward craft very well. He's big, he's strong, he's physical, he can impact around the ground as we've seen. He is the number one ruck. So the pro of him staying simply is the fact that he's the best of the guys right now. Yes, in the future, someone might surpass him. Nick Bryan, maybe Vicentini one day. But right now, and I would say most likely for next season, Sam Draper is the best ruckman at Essendon. It's a pretty simple one at that. The forward craft has been a big improvement. He's gone from being very wayward in front of goal to bringing in the snap kick, the around-the-body kick, whatever you'd like to call it, and that has cleaned up his set shots that we've seen earlier on the season. So if that's something that continues, he can continue to develop that, we're going to see a lot more goals from Sam, hopefully in red and black. Other pro, he's a fan favourite. That's something we've got to realise, and it might not take into account on a football sense on the pitch, but he's a fan favourite. There's a lot of people who would have Sam as their favourite player. There's lots of kids who love Sam. I reckon if we surveyed 100 Essendon supporters and said, who's your favourite player, there'd be a big portion of those who would say Sam Draper. Obviously, Zach Merritt would be up there. Maybe Nick Martin would be up there as well. Guys like Nate Caddy in that conversation as well. But Sam's a fan favourite. He gets people through the doors. He's very marketable. There's all that stuff that goes with him. Yes, all right, that doesn't equate to goals and victories, but it's an important thing for a football club just outside of the football sense. So those are some very simple pros for him staying. Let's look at some cons. Cons of Sam staying. Number one is I think it's a question of the body. Is it going to hold up? Is he going to be able to become a 20-plus game a season ruckman? We've seen in the past that in the last 3 seasons, he's played 14 games, 16 games. This season, it's just going to be 5 because of that ankle injury. Now, the ankle injury is an interesting one. I did speak to Dr. Damo today and asked him just for a little bit of an opinion on this. He said the most important question is this his jumping leg? Because if it is his jumping leg, it really will affect his ability to get in the air, particularly next year, and depending on how it rehabs, potentially for the rest of his future. There has been scenarios in the AFL and even in the NBA where players have done a similar injury to this, and yes, they've eventually gotten back there. But it's very common and almost likely that he might lose that little bit. And sometimes that little bit is the difference between being elite and not, because you're able to get that extra reach, that extra mark, whatever it may be. It's really going to be interesting to see how well he comes back from this injury. And it has really shaped this whole discussion on what his value is going to be, because we're not talking about a player who's in control of their situation right now. He's not in control because he's not playing. If you're in control, you play well. You force the price up, whether that's with Essendon or whether that's with another club. But he's not playing now, so there is going to be this speculation. Will he get back to being the best that he can be? That's the big con right now. The other thing as well, I guess it's not exactly a con, but it is something to consider, is can you get into a position where you overpay someone? Now, the reports at the moment is that Essendon might be offering him somewhere around the $700,000 a year mark, but there's interest from other clubs who may be willing to pay him an extra $100,000 more For Essendon, are we going to get put in this position where we've got to pay a guy $900,000 a year? For me, I don't think he's worth that. I don't think a lot of ruckmen are worth that. It's a very risky position to be spending all that money on, particularly with someone who's got a bad injury history. Let's remember he did an ACL very early on in his career. He's had hip problems. He's had knee problems. This year was finally looking like the year that he was fit and firing and ready to go to really dominate. And then he does his Achilles and he's out for a long period of time. So overpaying is a big concern. Are you going to put all this money on someone and then they don't live up to the hype, they're never available through fitness problems, and you just go, well, gee, we've just spent a lot of our salary cap on something we're not getting the return on? That's a big concern. Another thing to consider, and this is less of a con, but more just a way of going, okay, how's this going to affect the rest of the team if Sam stays? Now, the obvious one to think about is that, look, next season, if Sam's playing for Essendon, it's unlikely that he's going to be playing 70, 80% game time as the ruckman. It's unlikely that's going to be the case. He's going to be sharing it, whether that's with Peter Wright, whether that's with another ruckman. Not entirely sure what the team's going to be week to week, but that's going to be a big consideration here. Now, we know depth is important. We've seen this season that we've gone from having too many rucks to not enough in a very, very short space of time. Now, the first person this is going to affect is Nick Bryan. If Sam Draper stays, does that mean Nick Bryan stays? You'd think the club would be viewing it going, look, we don't need both of them. Would we like to keep them both? Probably. It's good to have options, good to force competition. But if you're Nick Bryan and you're in this camp and you see that Sam signs a big deal, you're going, well, I think I'm good enough to be a number one AFL ruck, and I would like to be a number one AFL ruck at some point in my career. Should I look to go elsewhere? That might be the scenario for him. So if Draper stays, what's this going to do to Nick? That's the very first one. Next one, look a bit different, is Peter Wright. Peter Wright has had an average couple of years, but this season's really starting to look more like the Peter Wright before that shoulder injury. He's obviously marking well. He's getting back on the score sheet, crashing packs, being a good pressure player. A lot better than he was last season and the season before. Now, we've seen that he's a good ruck forward option. He's a really good option to have in the forward line because he takes the number one defender away from Nate Caddy. He's a good pinch hit in the ruck and goes, very, very well against other number two, forward ruck types. And I think he's comfortably in our best 22 at the moment. So bringing Draper in, is it Draper and Wright that play together, or you're in a position where you've got this extra ruck on the list, potentially a Bryan, a Vicentini or someone, and then you're trying to work out how this is going to marry up with these guys. Goldstein, look, he's very close to retirement. If Draper goes, he might play next year. He might play next year again to be that old head, to help Bryan, to help Vicentini, Blackerson if he's still on the list, that sort of thing. Who knows with him? Vicentini's the other one. Look, he's a very raw ruckman. He's so young. He was exciting. He had some really good moments in the Fremantle game. But let's be honest, he was absolutely dominated. He was dominated by Luke Jackson. He's not ready to be a mainstay number one ruck. It's great that he had his opportunity. He'll continue to develop, definitely one for the future. But you can't be expecting this guy to be playing week on, week out. Like, that's just not where things are at right now. I guess as well as this, you can look at the sort of wider forward structure of what happens if Sam stays, because obviously you've got guys like Kyle Langford, you've got guys like Archer May. Like, if Wright, Bryan, Caddy, Draper, Langford, everyone's fit, wants to play, like, you can't really play all these guys in the same team. Langford might have to play up the ground. You might only play one of these ruckmen. There's a lot of different things that could happen here. May's a promising young footballer. I guess we're all really hoping the best out of him, but he wouldn't play ahead of Wright. He wouldn't play ahead of Caddy. And then if you've got one or two more ruckmen in the team, how does that shake up, particularly if Langford's fit and available? Look, the thing is this: if Draper stays, there's a cascading effect here. Because he is the number one ruck in my eyes, it's going to affect everyone else. The obvious one is Nick Bryan, but then it's also going to affect the shape of the forward line because he's just not a ruckman at the moment who can ruck the majority of the game time. Maybe one day, but right now, he's just not. Something to think about. So, he goes. Sam Draper leaves the Essendon Football Club. Let's look at the positive side. Let's look at the pros. The first one is draft capital. So potentially, he's a free agent, but we will get some compensation. So potentially, depending on the deal, Essendon could get a first-round draft pick or an end-of-first-round draft pick compensation. If Adelaide or Brisbane were to be paying, circa $900K a year for quite a few years, maybe I think it's like 4 or 5, then we would get a first-round pick. Then you're looking at 3 top 10 picks potentially. That's a pretty good result if that happens. I think more likely scenario is that if he was to go, it's going to hit that end of first round position where you're probably looking around the mid-20s range is what I know Kaltumi was speaking about, and that's what's been reported. So I guess the question here you have to ask is Nick Bryan going to net you a better pick than a mid-20 pick? Probably not. I don't think it would. So that's something to consider. If the focus right now is getting draft picks and getting more younger guys in, is Bryan going to get you a better pick than Draper going as a free agent? Probably not. I don't think that's going to be the case. Now, look, we obviously would get the extra draft pick. We'd also free up some more salary space because a player who is potentially demanding $800K plus isn't taking that salary. Nick Bryan's not going to be commanding anywhere near that fee. You're going to have more cash available, more options to do, more things in that scenario. So this is the pro. The pro is that it really does open up the possibilities here. It really opens up the possibilities, one, that you can do with your list, but also with that sort of ruck forward balance as I was speaking about. Because if Bryan becomes your number one ruck, ideally he's playing as much ruck minutes as possible. You have Peter Wright as your ruck forward. You have Nate Caddy playing, and then you potentially have a May or a Langford or maybe someone else who's not even on our list right now playing in those roles, and you've got a different look at it. You've got Vicentini who can come up from the VFL. Maybe Old Gold hangs around for one more year to give that support. I feel like there is a bit more options about what you could do, whereas if you've got Draper, I think it is limited. Again, unless Bryan is going as well. And look, let's be honest, are we going to keep both? It does seem unlikely. Let's look at the cons. The cons of Sam Draper going. I think the first one is that his replacements are, I guess you could say, unproven or untrustworthy at this point in time for different reasons. Old Gold, he's at the end of his career. We know what he can do. We know what he can't do. Nick Bryan is in a similar position to Sam Draper right now where we don't know when and if how long it'll take for him to get back to his best. He's had an ACL injury. That's basically a season out of football. He's going to come back slow. He's going to have to build back into it. It's unlikely he's going to be hitting the ground running at the start of 26, absolutely flying. So that's another thing to consider as well, that, all right, the number 2 ruck is also now an injury-prone ruckman and someone that we have to manage through something like this as well. Again, Vicentini, promising young ruckman, but so far off being a reliable number 1 ruck week in, week out. Long way to go. Hopefully he gets there, but he's just not. So the con really is that by losing Draper, yes, you've got another guy who's going to come in Bryan or Vicentini, but I don't think either of those two are at the level Sam has been at in the past year or so. Not to say they can't get there, but 2026 might be a year where we're often conceding the ruck battle, like we have been this year with our injury crisis. We spoke about him being a fan favourite. If we lose him, there's going to be a lot of upset people, a lot of upset kids, a lot of upset fans, people who've got, Draper memorabilia, as I point to the one behind me here, who are going to be sad to see him go, because Sam Draper gets the Essendon crowd up and about. When he does something incredible, when he bursts out of a pack, he takes a snap, he takes a big mark. He is someone who energises the team, he energises the fan base. And look, when you've been to an Essendon game at Marvel or at the MCG, when the Essendon crowd is up and about, it is an incredible atmosphere. It is absolutely humming. And Sam Draper is a player who can really get the crowd up and about. There's a couple on the list who can at the moment, but he's one that really gets people fired up. And look, it would suck to lose him. I really think it would. To summarise, personally, I want Sam Draper to stay. I do. But I don't think he's worth 800, 900k a season, especially considering his injury history. I just don't think he's worth that. I really don't think he's worth that. But that being said, if he does go, it really opens up the possibilities of what we could do. Potentially you're getting a high draft pick, you're freeing up more cap space to go after someone else for a bit more money in another area of the ground that we may need. And it does, I feel, give you more options of what you can do with your rucks and with your forwards, knowing that Sam's not there. Because, as we've seen, you know, he hasn't had the ability to play really long minutes in the ruck so far in his career. I think the other thing to consider as well is that, like with a lot of the list decisions that Essendon has to make right now, the question is often about when do we expect this team, or when do we want this team to be firing and ready for finals? Because if it's in 1 to 2 years, Sam has to be a part of that. He absolutely has. He's hitting the prime of his career. This is when you expect to get the best football out of a big man, 26 to 30, even maybe a little bit longer than that. This is like the good years for someone who's been developing for quite some time. But if the club views this as like, hey, look, it's probably more like 3 or 4 years as we continue to turn over the list, continue to develop young guys, this is when we think we're going to be pushing, then maybe Sam doesn't need to be part of that conversation, because you can invest the time into Brian, you can invest the time into Vicentini, and you can use the cash and the picks elsewhere to boost up your list. So, look, I'd like Sam to stay. He's a fan favourite. He's one of my favourites, but it's not the end of the world if he goes. It opens up a lot of possibilities of what we could do. Let me know your thoughts. Are you stay? Are you go? Are you undecided? Let me know. Go Dons.